Hello and welcome to Proper Unskimmed. This episode I've got Rob Preece from the Howard League for Penal Reform on with me to discuss the history of that charity and the current state of affairs for prisons in the UK. Rob, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, please, and explain to us what the Howard League does and is? Thank you.
Yes, so I'm the head of communications at the Howard League for Penal Reform, quite an unusual name for a charity, and the first thing I'm normally asked when people hear that name is, who's Howard? And Howard is John Howard, who was a prominent figure in the 18th century, who became Sheriff of Bedfordshire. And back in those days, sheriffs didn't tend to care too much about the people they locked up, but John Howard was different. He went into Bedford jail and was actually mortified by what he saw, the destitution in the poverty, people held in awful conditions, and he decided that things ought to change. And so things changed in Bedford jail, but they also changed in other jails as well, because John Howard paid them a visit. In fact, he went all over Europe looking at penal institutions and reporting back to the politicians of the day on what he saw. So I suppose he was a trailblazer in that respect, and the Howard League's work continues to do that very thing. We tell politicians what we're seeing in prisons. We give evidence to select committees, and we hold meetings with ministers. And we do that because we have members in prison who tell us what's happening. We conduct our own visits where we meet governors and people in prison. And we do extensive research and campaign work as well. So the Howard League began life as the Howard Association in 1866. So this year we're celebrating our 160th birthday. And it was set up by people who wanted John Howard's work to continue. John Howard had died in 1790, but there remained a lot of problems in prisons. And so supporters of Howard's work, who primarily wanted to end capital punishment, founded an organisation called the Howard Association, which would later join forces with the Penal Reform League to become the Howard League for Penal Reform in 1921. And we're the oldest prison reform charity in the world, and I feel very honoured to have worked there for the last 14 years.
Fantastic. So what is it that drew you to that? Because you were in journalism beforehand.
That's right. I was a journalist for about 10 years before I began work at the Howard League. And my interest in this work really began in my very first few months as a journalist. I come originally from a city called Plymouth in the southwest of England, and I was a trainee reporter at the Plymouth Evening Herald, my hometown paper. And one of my first tasks was to go down to Plymouth Magistrates Court and cover the cases that were being heard one morning. And I'll never forget one day being there and a case being called on, and the defendant was being brought up from a cell underneath the courtroom. It was a holding cell within the court building, and this man was presented in court, and he was flanked by two quite burly security guards. And I immediately thought, this man has been held in custody. Presumably he is charged with a very serious offence, and presumably the readers of the Plymouth Evening Herald will want to know what it is he's suspected of doing. So I got my notebook out and started scribbling, and then the case began. The man was asked to confirm his name and address. His address was no fixed abode. He was homeless. And then the clerk of the court read out the charges that he faced, and he was charged with one count of theft. The particulars of the offence being that on that day or the day before, he had stolen a child's toy to the value of about £1.99 from Toys R Us. And I thought, this is an extraordinary great deal of effort to go to for such a trivial matter. And then the details of the case came to light, and it turned out that this man had been released from prison earlier that day with a very small grant in his pocket. He had nowhere to live, and it came to the end of the day, and he thought, I've got to commit another crime in order to go back to prison because I've got nowhere to live. And it just brought home to me the futility of the criminal justice system, and it really lit a fire for me then. And I went on to be a political reporter and a crime reporter at various publications, and there was always this desire to come back to this work and to contribute in a more meaningful way. And so when an opportunity came up to join the Howard League and to help sort of bridge that gap between the charity and the journalists who are interested in this line of work, I really jumped at the chance, and it was the best decision I ever made.
Yeah. It sounds like you're doing great things, and it's cases like that that for the average person it doesn't really make sense, does it? Like, say a guy gets released and then steals a child's toy to go back. Was that within the same day?
Yeah, just extraordinary. I mean, we're all taxpayers. It's just an extraordinary situation where we're paying for the police officers to round that person up, to take them for interview, and then we're holding them in a cell, and then we've got well-remunerated lawyers acting for the prosecution and speaking on his behalf, and he appears in a courtroom, and then he's sent back to prison, which is extraordinarily expensive, and you know that those conditions in prison will not prepare him for the world outside again. It'll prepare him in just the same way that it did the last time, and he'll be seeking to return to prison again if he can't get the support he requires. And it really made me think to myself, well, there's got to be a better way of doing this, and the Howard League for Penal Reform, its raison d'etre is to present those better ways of doing it and to work with people to try and make that happen.
Hi again there, Rob. We just had a technical problem then. You were just telling us a story about a gentleman who had appeared in court for stealing a child's toy, having just been released from prison. So the idea was that there was a complete lack of support on the outside. And is it that he felt it was better for him to go back?
Yeah, it seemed from the way the case was presented that this man had run out of options very quickly after being released. And obviously I couldn't say how much effort had gone into preparing him for release, but whatever it was hadn't worked. And sure enough, the magistrates were sending him back to custody. And it just dawned on me that there must be many such cases up and down the country. And sure enough, there are. So, the prison population in England and Wales is very high. It's around about 85,000 at the moment, which, to put that in context, is about the second highest in Western Europe. France has just overtaken us. Right. And the majority of those people are in serving quite long sentences, but there is a significant proportion of people who are serving very short periods of time in custody, like this man I described in Plymouth all those years ago. And they're in a sort of revolving door where they'll be in prison for a short while. They'll be taken away from their family and other support networks. They will be exposed often to some quite horrendous conditions, and then with hope and a prayer, they're released back into the community with little chance to move on from crime in many cases. And there's got to be a better way of doing this. So that's what drew me to this work, and it keeps me going.
Yeah. So, what, in your opinion, what is a better way of doing it? Is that less people in prison, which I think the Howard League talks about, or is it better support on the way out of prison and upon leaving, or is it maybe a mixture of both?
I mean, there are all sorts of ways of tackling this problem, but it's certainly the case that it's very, very difficult to do anything positive in a system that is so terribly overcrowded. And I don't just mean prisons. Prisons are overcrowded, but probation is overcrowded as well. Workloads are absolutely enormous in some cases, and caseloads are very high. I mean, we've got about 120 prisons in England and Wales right now. More than half of them are holding more people than they were ever intended to hold. Some of the numbers are absolutely eye-watering. Prisons like Wandsworth have, in the recent past been holding sort of 1,600 men when they're intended to hold about 950. Wow. Extraordinary levels of overcrowding. Cells that were designed for one person being shared. There have been staff shortages as well, and what that means. When a prison is overcrowded and under-resourced, frankly being asked to do too much with too little for too long, the resources just aren't there to offer the regime that that would have at least have a chance of helping people to turn their lives around. What you'll find is that many people will be locked inside their cells for hours on end with nothing to do, so they're not getting the education, training, exercise, skills, all the things they're likely to need to live more productively and move on from crime. And in the local jails, there's a lot of churn, a lot of people coming in each day, a lot of people leaving each day, and so the situation's rarely static, it's rarely stable. It's very, very hard for staff to build meaningful relationships with the people under their supervision, and people clearly aren't being set up to succeed on release. In other prisons where people are serving longer sentences, regimes are a bit more stable, but we're even seeing problems there, problems such as violence, self-harm, and the like. And all of these things aren't helping people to move on from crime on their release, prepare for release, and for that to be done, safely. And when you have overcrowding in the system, it gives you so much less room for manoeuvre. It's very hard to move people around the prison system to prisons that are more suitable for them, that might be closer to friends and family, which the positive benefits of involvement of friends and family and people's release planning is well documented. And when there are problems in prisons, God forbid, say there's a major disturbance, or say there is some vital improvement work needs to be done, and we know that there are about 20,000 prison places awaiting the installation of automatic fire detection equipment, for example.
Really?
That's how sort of decrepit the situation is, and the government's having real difficulty in meeting any targets it sets for itself, because it can't afford to lose prison cells for even a day or two, because the prison system is so overcrowded that they need every cell available. So that isn't setting people up. And then when people come to be released, as I said, probation is very overcrowded as well. So you have probation officers having to look after dozens of people all at the same time, and they aren't always in a great position to be able to provide the support that people require either. And this is a largely unreported world. Most people, thankfully, never set foot in a prison. They never have cause to really sort of investigate what goes on in them. But we all feel the after effects when this doesn't go well, because we see it in new crimes being committed and everything else. And this is a situation that we have made for ourselves through political decisions over the course of several decades. And we've reached a point now where radical action is required, not just to make things better, but just to cope with what we're doing at the moment, because there's no room left in the prison, and things clearly aren't working as they should. So
I assume that if we had some radical action, as you say there, we would potentially need more money investing as well into the whole service. I know that a lot of people kind of got in around there, just build more prisons, which, okay, I guess you could build more prisons, but there's systemic problems that doesn't necessarily answer, does it? If we had new prisons, maybe the conditions could be better and improved. People might not be sharing cells and whatnot, but reconviction rates don't necessarily get affected by that, do they?
Yeah, I mean, the argument for building a new prison used to be it could replace the shoddy old prisons, but that never happens in reality. What happens is it's just extra capacity within the system, and the jails are normally filled quite quickly. And then what you're left with is an even bigger problem to solve than you had in the first place. It's rather like putting an extra lane on a motorway to ease congestion. Well, people soon get wind of the fact that this road is a bit better than it used to be, and so they use that way of getting from A to B, but rather than a different route. And that road is just as clogged up as it was before. It's just bigger. So when you get to the service station, the queue for the toilet's even longer. And it's a little bit like that in the prison system. We are continuing to just make the prison system bigger and bigger and bigger. I mean, the prison population has doubled since the 1990s. And
that's not a long time, is it, either,
no,
since the 90s?
it's really not. So in the 1990s, we were trundling along with about 40 to 45,000 people in prison. In this decade, it's just come down recently because the government has had to bring in some sort of panic measures to reduce the prison population slightly. But we have been approaching 88, 89,000 in recent months, and that's happened because sentences have got longer and longer. If you ask most people in the street, if you were to ask them, are prison sentences getting longer or shorter, they'd probably say shorter. But you actually look at the numbers, they've actually got significantly longer. And if you committed a crime today, you could expect to be put away for much longer now than you would if you'd committed the same crime 20, 30 years ago. And so what that means is that people stay in the system for longer. That overcrowding, which was already chronic, is exacerbated still further.
So why is that?
It's rhetoric, isn't it? I mean, every time election time comes around, we have what amounts to an arms race, really, between the main parties as to who can lock up more people for as long as possible.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunately the prevailing attitude is when something goes wrong, the easy thing to do is to say, okay, well, if anyone else does that thing that went wrong, we will punish them by ensuring they must spend X number of years in prison. And that puts a plaster over the wound, but it does nothing to get to the root causes of why things went wrong in the first place and how you might prevent that happening. It's simply a case of giving a sentencing to send a message to anybody else who might consider doing that. In actual fact, the evidence for deterrence in imprisonment is actually pretty weak. What deters people from committing crime in the main is the prospect of getting caught. If people think they might get caught, they're much less likely to commit the crime. And then when they are caught, they get their names in the papers and they get shunned by their local neighbours and whatever else, and that's actually a very strong deterrent. But for many people, they're not. When they're in the heat of the moment, whether it's the gentleman who was stealing something from Toys R Us so he could go back to prison, or whether it's somebody who loses self-control in the heat of the moment, whether those people aren't having a rational conversation with themselves about how long or otherwise they're likely to spend in prison. They're just doing what they're doing. And I'm much more concerned with ensuring they're not put in a position where they do what they do. And that's actually a much harder conversation to have with the public around about election time. So So nobody's there advocating that sentences should get shorter, but we now have a government that's having to release people early because it's like they've had to pay back on the loan. Really, we've borrowed and borrowed and borrowed to put people in prison, and we've now reached a point where we can't do that anymore. Now, the government is trying to build new prisons. They're spending £4 billion on new prisons. But I think people are entitled to ask why that money isn't being directed on making the prisons we already have fit for purpose and fit, living conditions that help people to move on from crime rather than leading them to persist in their previous ways.
What would you prioritise with that money then? If you could suddenly be in charge of that $4 billion and say, right, we don't need more prisons, where would you put it?
Hospitals, schools, all these other things that we could use that money for in public services. The thing is, prisons are a big drain on public services. The cost of a prison place is very high. The chief inspector of prisons published his annual report earlier today, and he said that the typical cost of a prison place is about £59,000 a year. My hunch is that people are prepared to pay whatever it takes if they think it will keep them safe. The reality is our prison system is not keeping us safe because when people are released from it, and the vast majority of people will be released at some point, they're not being given the support they require to move on from crime and live productive lives. Some do, many don't. And it costs the taxpayer in other ways as well because, we have seen very high levels of violence and self-harm. A self-harm. Prisons in England and Wales record a self-harm incident once every 6 minutes.
Wow.
6 or 7 minutes, and
that's what's been recorded, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
It's not necessarily everything that actually happens.
I think the stat is once every 7.5 minutes at the moment, and that's what's being recorded. And of course, every time there's a serious incident, then you've got police cars heading to the prison, you've got ambulances heading to the prisons, and that puts a strain on the local community. So perhaps unsurprisingly, people aren't especially keen on having prisons built near them. And so the governments are trying to build new prisons at great expense because they're running out of room. They want these prisons to be as large as possible. Yeah. And people living nearby aren't too keen on that. And I wouldn't be keen on it either. And so governments aren't able to build prisons fast enough to keep pace with the sentence inflation, as we call it. These sentences getting longer and longer, leading to a consequent rise in the prison population. And so we're stuck in this kind of doom loop where people spend longer and longer in the system. And the longer they're in the system and the longer they're out of sort of circulation, for want of a better word, the harder it is for them to reintegrate and be rehabilitated when they come to the end of that sentence. So I would direct that money if I was ever fortunate enough to be given £4 billion of capital to spend. I would be directing it at other public services where that money is badly needed. Yeah. And I would be looking to have I wouldn't abolish prisons. The Howard League isn't an abolitionist charity, but we would abolish prisons as they currently look and feel. We would want a smaller prison system where there were highly trained staff working with people who needed to be in a secure setting, and work being done to make those people better prepared for the world outside. As it is, we've got warehouses up and down the country where very little goes on. People aren't given the support they require to turn their lives around, and then we're just hoping, aren't we, after that, the people who are released from that toxic system don't behave in such a way that they end up back there too soon.
It is the ultimate question, is it? Like, what is the point? What is the point of having the whole service? Well, obviously, the public want to feel protected. And they will, if somebody's done something dangerous and they've been put in prison, in theory, that person cannot do that to a member of the public during that time. But then we have this idea of justice and what is justice and where does revenge sort of come into it. And you mentioned capital punishment earlier on, and obviously that's long gone for us. But I think if a person's been the victim of something, justice means different. I'm trying to say that justice means different things to different people, doesn't it?
I mean, I would hesitate to say that capital punishment was long gone for us. I mean, I don't think progress in this field is always linear, and politics and rhetoric can be very powerful, and we have seen a number of very high-profile cases in recent months, which have led people to say, "Well, what are we doing here?" And this is the difficulty. This is sentence inflation at its most extreme, isn't it? We have about 80 people, I think, now who are in the prison system who have been told that under no circumstances are they coming out. They're not eligible to seek parole. They've been given what's called a whole life order, which is a real life means life sanction. And that number has grown. And when people look at what those people have done in order to receive that order, it's very, very hard to sympathise with their situation. But what you are in fact doing is giving a number of people absolutely nothing to lose. What possible way can they contribute beyond just behaving in a way that makes life very, very difficult for people who work in prisons and whatever. As soon as you remove hope from someone, their behaviour inevitably changes. And so, I saw a case recently where, people who've been given whole life orders were given extra whole life orders because they'd gone on to murder somebody else within the prison. And the thing is that, this is the situation you get yourself in. It's sort of punishment leads to more punishment.
Yeah.
it leads to more harm. And you're
It's a
often
lot of the
you
possibilities
ask,
are there.
yeah, you ask what is the point? Well, I mean, people talk about a prison's there to punish or to rehabilitate. And a lot of people say that they should do both. Well, I mean, those are two completely opposite
Yeah,
sort of situations, aren't they? And
yeah,
the reality is, when someone is deprived of their liberty, that is the punishment. They are deprived of their liberty as punishment, and not there
yeah,
for additional punishment. Once you have taken the decision to take somebody off the streets, and as politicians
yeah,
would say it, and you put them in prison, well, there you have to make the very most of that opportunity to support that person to change
yeah.
their ways.
If you're forcibly keeping someone in a certain place, that is the best time to try and redrive that person in a different direction, isn't it? Because they are there.
It is a chance. It is a chance, and it's a chance we don't put ourselves in a position to take because the system is so overcrowded that we can't provide that support at the key moment.
So staff
We get a lot of letters from
firefighting.
people. Yeah, we get a lot of letters from members who have spent a very long time in prison, and the boredom, the frustration,
Yeah.
just the futility of it all comes through loud and clear from those letters. You see it in the eyes of the staff when you go around prisons. There's a sort of grim inevitability to everything. There's a fatalism within the prison system.
Yeah,
And the reality is, these are political choices.
yeah, certainly.
We don't have to do it this way. Other countries don't. What it requires is a bit of courage,
Yeah,
and that is in short supply.
and leadership that really believes in what they want to do, regardless of whether they're going to get voted in next time.
Yeah, I mean, it's I keep hearing there are no votes in it. There are no votes in it, but
Yeah,
if you could show the public that you were reducing crime, there's votes in that.
Yeah.
The problem is
definitely.
it requires concerted effort for a very, very long period of time.
yeah, yeah,
It probably requires the political parties to work together, and there's not much evidence of that ever having happened in Crime and Punishment.
no,
But nevertheless, we have to change course because what we're doing right now isn't working.
Do you imagine things changing course anytime soon, or are you not much? Are you not very hopeful?
Well, they're having to change course in a way because we've run out of room in the prisons. So we've got the we've got the Sentencing Act 2026, which has gained royal assent, and things are starting to happen there. One of the key changes is that people are spending less of their, a smaller proportion of their sentence in custody, and there's more emphasis on supervision in the community. That puts an enormous burden on a probation service that has really been dragged from pillar to post over the course of the last sort of 10, 15 years with a catastrophic part privatisation and a real hollowing out of many of the things that made that service a high performing one in the eyes of countless inspections before that journey began. We now have probation officers under tremendous pressure, and the government has indicated they're going to support the probation service, but we have to wait to see if that support actually leads to tangible change.
Yeah.
But I mean, that is an example of what I mean. Governments can hold people in prison for shorter periods of time when they have to.
Yeah. Yeah.
The problem of doing it this way is it kind of undermines confidence in the system as a whole. When a judge hands down a sentence, the expectation from all of us is that sentence will be served, and when it's changed because it needs to change because there's simply the grim reality hits everyone that there isn't enough space in prison to accommodate all the people that are being sent there, then unsurprisingly, the victims of those crimes are asking, what on earth has happened here?
Yeah.
So you have to go back to first principles and think to yourself, okay, like every time a crime is committed, it's up to us as to how we respond to that.
Yeah.
And if somebody has stolen a toy from Toys R Us at the value of £1.99, now admittedly that was about 20 years ago, it's probably worth about £3.49 now.
Yeah.
It's still not enough to cross the threshold for incarceration, in my view, and I think in many people's view.
Yeah.
And people will say, well, that man probably did that several times. Well, okay.
But
That's a
why?
sign. That's a sign that we need to do things differently, is it
Yeah.
not?
Yeah.
Um, all that money that's being spent on processing these prosecutions could be going to the hospital down the road or to the
Yeah.
police service or whatever else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
You fix those other institutions, and the need
yeah,
to commit crime reduces, doesn't it?
yeah.
Anyway.
We need to get back to being a high trust society
Hmm.
where things work.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
when public services are shown to be failing, it undermines everything. And
Yeah.
the prison service is just down on its knees and has been for a long period of time. It's an awful place to be in that kind of crouched position permanently. But morale among staff is
Yeah.
very low.
Yeah.
Um,
Understandably.
yeah, and outcomes obviously aren't what you'd expect to see from any other public service. And I think,
Yeah.
frankly, the prisons are out of sight, out of mind for many people. But if any other
Yeah.
public service was performing in the way that prisons are, there'd be an absolute outcry.
Yeah. 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 Definitely. So reconviction rates are really high, aren't they? And you've got the idea of maybe somebody like the guy who stole the toy, but people that aren't in that boat and come back out and commit more crime, do you think that that's largely because of that lack of support, that lack of rehabilitation, and the kind of the reset? If people were better equipped to re-enter the world, they might not need to commit that crime again.
Yeah, I mean, on reconviction rates, it largely depends on where you look and who you ask. I mean, the
Right.
reconviction rates are quite low, ironically, for people who've spent a very long time in prison, often
Right.
because they've grown older.
Yeah.
The system has had longer to plan for their release, to get accommodation in place, to get all those ducks in a row. It doesn't always
Yeah.
work, but
Yeah.
where things get a bit more volatile is for our friend from Toys R Us, where they're in and they're
Yeah.
out and they're in and they're out all the time, and it's a frustration for the police. And they're rounding them up
Yeah.
and back in they go, and they're into the systems for such a short time that it's enough
Yeah.
to sort of disrupt their life some more, but not enough to actually sort of get the skills and the support they're going to require to properly stay out next time. Now, the government, again, when it's looking for prison space, has recognised that short prison sentences are largely unproductive and counterproductive.
Yeah.
And so we are seeing some movement there. The other thing, when prisons are overcrowded, I mean, that leads to violence and so on. That means that crime is continuing to be committed. It's just happening in prisons. And so
Yeah.
there is much more work to do there as well. But I mean, the best crime prevention measure there can be is finding somebody a home and a job.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
And that's why when people ask me what would I spend the money on, I'd be saying, well, houses and jobs.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
cut crime much more
of course it
effectively
does.
than a prison ever will.
Yeah. Purpose
Yeah.
and the ability to look after yourself and your family is a good driver forwards, isn't it?
Yeah.
I meant to double check with you a bit before we came on, but did you do some work on children's prisons some years ago?
Well, we continue to do work. We're interested in the whole prison estate, and the Howard League has a legal advice line which provides legal advice, as the name suggests, to
Yeah.
children and young adults in the system aged 21 and under.
Yeah.
We are particularly interested in what happens in 4 prisons which hold children. There's Wetherby in West Yorkshire, there's Warrington in Staffordshire, there's Feltham in West London, and there's Park in South Wales. And we've done a lot of work recently looking at how much time, or as it happens, how little time children are getting out of their cells for education and the like, and it's pitifully low. But I mean, at the same time, the child imprisonment is actually an area of great progress by comparison with other nooks and crannies of the justice system in the last 15 to 20 years. I mean, when I joined the Howard League it was starting to come down. The population of children in prison had been like touching 3,000. Now I think it's around 400.
That's a big difference.
And it's a big difference. And one would hope that would have led to an improvement in conditions within these places. It kind of hasn't in many ways, but there are at least fewer children affected by it than before. That's happened because of a concerted effort by lots of organisations working together and recognising that child imprisonment can be counterproductive. I think a big driver for it was a campaign that the Howard League led for many years, where we just urged the police forces to arrest fewer children. Yeah. What we found in like the Blair years, people, listeners may remember like Tough on Crime, Tough on the Causes of Crime, and the introduction of target-driven policing, where the metric by which we would judge how effective or otherwise a police force was how many arrests were they making, and
that's a problem.
What that led to is neighbourhood policing becoming a place where sergeants were under pressure to get arrest rates high, and they would pick up the low-hanging fruit. They'd find children sitting in a park drinking cider or whatever, and they would round them up, take them to their parents, and nick them on the way. And what that meant was that when those children came to seek further education or employment or whatever, it was coming up on their records, and they were being put on a path away from thriving and towards further criminalisation. And the more contact children were having with the system, the more entrenched they became with it, and the more serious their offending became. So it's been a real success story that police forces were able to divert like large numbers of children away from the system. But it remains the case that conditions inside prisons holding children are unacceptable. Prison's no place for a child. There are secure settings that are better suited. If a child does require a secure environment, and very few children do, then often the best course of action is a local authority run secure children's home or something like that, where there's more intensive support available. There are better ratios for staff to children, and they often lead to better outcomes as well.
So those places, as described on the tin, sort of more of a care home kind of approach, but it's secure. Yeah,
I mean, you go around, they often look like schools. There are classrooms and the like. I have to say that when I visited a secure children's home, the tidiest bedrooms of children I'd ever seen in my life.
Really?
Yeah.
It's a good message to see that, isn't it? Because just doing those small things right are possibly what's not been happening beforehand. I mean, obviously you want children in secure settings for as short a time as possible, but if you must have a child in a secure environment, better somewhere there than in a prison where they're spending hours on end locked inside their cells with no engagement with other people. All children need like fresh air, contact with other people, to thrive, and prisons consistently fail to provide that. Yeah, as you said, the word prison and child are difficult words to match together, aren't they? Yeah, definitely. You mentioned before about comparatives to other countries, and the two kind of totally opposite examples that I think about is the current El Salvador CSOP prison. I don't know if you've seen that, any imagery from that place, which is so punitive. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, I haven't followed the programs all that closely, but I've seen a lot of the commentary around them, and I'm obviously familiar with the changes that have been going on in El Salvador. Not intimately, but their leader is pretty vocal as to what he's doing and what he's trying to do. And then at the other end of the extreme, I suppose you're going to point to Scandinavia and things that go on there. I'm always a bit wary of policy tourism, because those institutions haven't just sort of come about in a vacuum. They've come about as their products of the communities that they serve, in inverted commas. I can't claim to be an expert in El Salvador domestic policy,
No,
but I'm willing to bet it's very, very different to the circumstances that we've
it
seen
is.
in Norway and in Scandinavia you've got high trust but high taxation societies, tax and
Yeah.
spend and whatever.
Hmm.
I mean, would a prison like that be countenanced in this country?
So is that like Bastoy, for example?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I guess it might one day if it could be shown to be working.
Yeah.
But I think it's pie in the sky right now because the the cultural shift that would need to happen to make that even a possibility
Yeah.
would be such that so many other things in our daily lives would change beyond recognition that
Yeah.
we'd be dealing with that as well.
Yeah.
Um, it's a tricky one. I mean, there is a prison called Grendon which
Right.
um, sort of adopts some of those principles. It's got a much more rehabilitative focus, and it's got really good outcomes. And we often joke that when dignitaries from other countries come to England and Wales to see our prison system, they're often taken to Grendon and showed as
Right.
that as being an example. But
Yeah.
I think Grendon is harder. The services at Grendon is harder to deliver at scale, and that's why
Hmm.
when new prisons are built, they tend to be of the sort of warehouse
Yeah. Yeah.
variety rather than sort of smaller intensive units. That isn't to say that some of these larger prisons don't have some innovation in them. I think governments have made a big deal of the fact they're sort of more eco-friendly and the like, and that's a positive. I mean,
Yeah.
I'd be not relaxed, but I'd be open to more prisons being built if other ones were shut. But they're not. What happens is the system gets bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
And it's a bit ludicrous, really, because there aren't enough staff at the moment to run the prisons we already have. Staff shortages mean that we've got people sleeping through their sentences on their bunks, and we're
Yeah.
just making the system even bigger.
Yeah. So is that staff shortages maybe because of the state of affairs in the prisons and
I think
people not wanting to work
it's
there?
it's a number of reasons. I think, yeah, I mean, successive governments have gone to great lengths for recruitment drives, and I think in part they've been moderately successful. I think the challenge is retention. We've seen
Yeah.
in many prisons, large proportions of the workforce being just 1 or 2 years in service, and we've seen lots of people. We've seen experienced people leave at the end of their careers, and people sort of stepping up into roles on a temporary basis, which obviously can present challenges. And then we've seen people leaving the service not long after they joined it.
Yeah.
It's a real challenge, and yeah, I mean, it's not an especially well paid vocation. Some of the environments that people are being asked to work in are unacceptably dangerous.
Yeah.
Again, these are conditions we've created for ourselves. Everything is a choice. Everything is happening because of political decisions taken somewhere or other. And there have been many scandals within the prison service. We hear about corruption and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Drugs are a scourge in prisons.
I was just going to ask if that was my next question. Yeah.
And we've seen in recent years, the introduction of sort of airport-style security, scanners and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. We're seeing, the government urging people to come up with suggestions as to how they can keep drones out of the prison estate and whatever.
I've seen the clips of the drones. It's unbelievable,
yeah.
Isn't it?
I mean, the reality is, when there's demand, there will always be people willing to supply. I remember going around one prison. I won't say which it is, but I'm sure this has happened in all of them, where I was shown. I was going around the grounds, and the governor pointed to a dead pigeon that was there in front of us, and came a bit closer, and the apologies to listeners in advance, but the prisoner's body the pigeon's body was in two parts, and it had been hollowed out, and some drugs had been in there, and it had been lobbed over the wall. Wow. So these are sort of the elaborate lengths that people will go to get drugs into places where people want drugs. Why do they want drugs? Because they're locked in their cells for 23 hours a day with nothing to do.
Yeah.
If you want to if you want to keep drugs out of prison, you need to provide purposeful activity for the people in those prisons. You need to reduce demand for the drugs in the first place.
Yeah, yeah.
And unfortunately, in too many prisons, people aren't doing anything at all.
Yeah. And then, again, maybe a lot of prisoners have got drug problems before they go into prison. And if prison was a place where there was no drugs, and they could be clean of that by the time they got out again, that might improve things on the outside as well, moving forwards.
Yes, but in reality, there's a worryingly high number of prison inspection reports which come out and say that quite a few people have picked up drug addiction issues within the prison. They went in clean, and then they, for various reasons, including the ones I've mentioned, have ended up trying drugs and becoming hooked. I mean, it's a big problem because where there are drugs, there is debt, and where there is debt, there is violence.
Yeah.
And that debt and that violence is often passed on from person to person and can lead to real problems for people living in prisons and for people working in them. Yeah, it's a real challenge, and it all stems from political rhetoric and promises being made to the public that can't be kept because there are a finite number of spaces in the system, and we can't lock up everyone.
No.
And then you have that overcrowding, which just makes it very, very hard for prisons to deliver what they're supposed to.
Yeah. So if we consider the idea of putting less people in prison, as you mentioned before, what is there in place of that? Things like community service, rehabilitation programs, but what are they on the outside of?
Yeah, I mean, the thing we've got to do is just stop the sentence inflation to begin with. I mean, and that would make a real difference because people would come to the end of their sentences that little bit earlier, and it would provide what people call headroom in the system that it doesn't currently have.
Yeah.
You don't want a situation like we got now where people are getting letters saying that person who was told they'd spend 3 years in prison is now spending 1.5 or 2 or whatever, and people are being understandably quite worried at receiving those letters. That isn't how it's supposed to work. People are supposed to serve the sentences they're given.
Yeah.
But we do have to just put our foot on the ball and think, what are we doing here? Take the Sycamore Gap tree in the northeast. A beautiful area of countryside, undeniably upsetting to people who visit. For something like that to happen, does it really warrant a long custodial sentence to put that right? Are there not more constructive ways of dealing with an issue like that?
What was
sentence
that
inflation?
At the end? I can't remember.
I think it was multiple years. I want to say sort of 3 or 4 years for at least one of the defendants.
Yeah.
And the thing is, you will never keep the public happy. You can't please everyone all the time. I remember looking at a few years. I give, as well as appearing on podcasts, Nick, I give talks in places as well. And one thing I point to quite often is that there was a survey done where people were asked, what is the appropriate sentence for a number of different misdemeanors, and I'll never forget that one of the questions was, what would be an appropriate sentence for somebody who was driving without their seatbelt on?
Yeah.
And one of the respondents has said 15 years in prison. Now, wearing a seatbelt is really important. If anyone's listening to this podcast and thinking about driving around without their seatbelt on, please don't wear a seatbelt. It's very, very important. But if you were caught without a seatbelt, I would not expect you to be put in prison for 15 years, and I suspect the majority of your peers wouldn't either. But there's somebody out there who thinks that is the right thing to do, and that's what I mean. Politicians can't please everyone, and yet they try to with their promises of longer and longer sentences. And so how do sentences get longer? Well, it can typically be, a terrible thing has happened in a constituency. The constituency MP says, we want to stop that terrible thing ever happening again. And the way we will do that is, anyone who does this needs to serve even longer in prison than before, because they've made the, I think, flawed sort of assessment that the way to stop this happening is just to increase the sentence for people who do it.
Yeah.
When there's very little evidence that that's going to work. That then gets taken to Parliament. Parliament think, oh yes, it's very important. Sometimes it will be a law that's introduced that will have somebody's name attached to it, and which makes it all the more difficult to dismiss because it brings a sort of emotive element to the proposed legislation.
Yeah.
And it works that way. And then what happens is, okay, let's give an example where somebody says, okay, anybody who attacks a member of staff in the NHS should be in prison for a minimum of 1 year. And everyone's like, yeah, the NHS is very important. That's right. And then another MP comes along and they've had a meeting with a union working for retail workers, and they say, okay, well, how come? We can argue whether a sentence, proposed prison sentence offers protection in inverted commas to anybody at all, but they might come along and say, how come the NHS workers are being protected and we're not? We need to see a similar sentence. And so someone comes along and says, well, we need to have a situation where anyone who assaults a retail worker, a shop worker, should be in prison for a minimum of 1 year. And then you come back a year later, and it turns out that those changes that were brought in haven't led to a reduction in assaults on NHS staff or shop workers. And the answer is, okay, well, we need to make the sentences longer, and that's how it works.
Yeah.
And then the long and short of it is you get a high-profile case of somebody having done something terrible. The sentence is handed down. It's a severe sentence within the guidelines that exist, but it's a shorter sentence than you would get if that person had been of a different profession and had been assaulted or whatever else. And then politicians say, oh, we need to fill that loophole. And they never think to themselves, okay, well, let's make the other sentences shorter. Then what they do is they make the shorter sentence longer to match it. And then before you know it, you've got 85,000 people and you've got a massive, great public policy problem. No government ever intends to let people out of prison early. The fact that it's happening right now should be a wake-up call to all of us that the current system isn't working as it should.
Yeah, even albeit through a forced hand kind of thing. So, obviously, what are your thoughts on the current policy with that then? Obviously, I'm assuming you think it's a positive step forward. But I mean, can that be extended?
No one would draw it up as it looks right now. If you're telling people that people will spend a certain amount of time in prison and that doesn't actually turn out to be the case, then that to me is a failure because you've set expectations at a certain level and you haven't met those expectations.
Yeah.
Do I think the government are right to be reducing the prison population? Absolutely. You are not going to tackle this problem by making the prison population larger and larger. Unfortunately, that's what's going to happen by the government's own population projections because they're building more prisons.
Yeah, of course.
What they're seeking to do right now is to buy some time until those new prisons are built, and then those prisons will be filled as faster than you can say sentence inflation.
Yeah.
And we'll have the situation again. And it's a difficult one because in the same week that you've got ministers coming on to television programs defending the fact that people are receiving letters to tell them that the perpetrator of their crime is being released early, you've got the same ministers increasing sentence lengths for things like murders in the home and that kind of thing. Because again, it's to fill those loopholes because there is disparity between sentences for murders outside the home and murders inside the home and everything else. And it's like, well, there's a sentence inflation. You're trying to solve the problem one way, but you're actually going to make the problem harder to solve in the long run because of what you're doing alongside. And it's almost a bit like, again, punishment versus rehabilitation. They're actually antagonistic opposites, and you just need to take a step back and think, what are we doing?
Yeah.
What are we doing?
Yeah. Again, going back to the purpose of it, is for the public to be a better place for everybody to exist in, isn't it?
No one wants to see more crime.
Yeah.
Right now the prison system is so overburdened that it is contributing to the crime problem because people are coming out of it without the building blocks in place to stay away from trouble.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to say it, actually, that it's actually connecting and contributing. Yeah. I'm just conscious of time, Rob. I have one more question. I'll give you a heads up on it if that's all right.
Mm.
If you could, we'll just not be screen then. If you could speak one sentence that everyone in the world would hear, what would that be?
It's a good question. I think I would say that, the past is out of our control, but what happens tomorrow is entirely up to us. I think, obviously there are natural disasters and the like that we might foresee but can't do much about, but every single problem in the prison service right now has come about because of a political decision taken somewhere at some stage.
Yeah.
And the worst thing we could do now is just to carry on as we always have.
Yeah.
Because we've got a lot of evidence now that it isn't working.
Yeah.
The Prime Minister could get up tomorrow and say, we're going to do things differently in prisons.
Yeah.
Not because we have to, although we have to, but because it's the right thing to do and it's the thing that will work. And what's stopping him from doing that is the knowledge that he'll be absolutely assailed by the media for even daring to suggest it. But the media will give him no credit for not doing that because they also will be there to talk about all the various problems in prisons that are happening as a consequence of that inaction. Yeah. So let's do what works. We hear a lot of talk about whether people are being soft on crime or tough on crime when what really matters is whether it works or not. Yeah. And wouldn't it be better to spend those billions of pounds that are earmarked for new prisons on things like hospitals, schools, jobs and growth? No trouble, Nick. Thanks for having us on.
I'll put the link, obviously, in the bio for the Howard League for Penal Reform. You said about there's contacts, the sources of help, on there for people.
Yeah, I mean, there's information on there. We've got a legal advice line for children and young people aged 21 and under, and yeah, there's information on there as to where people can find out more about the system. No problem at all, Nick. Thanks ever so much. Lovely. Take care. Bye-bye.